The darkness smelled like silk and fear. She was only 14, and the last thing she had seen of the outside world was the cold, indifferent shine of the Bosphorus, reflecting a sky that would never again feel like her own. Now a heavy door, thick enough to muffle screams, had sealed her fate. She was inside. They called it the sacred sanctuary, but the silence, heavy and suffocating, whispered a different name: the cage. Eileen did not know how long she had been traveling. Days blended into a dizzying rush of cold floorboards, rattling carriage wheels, and the taste of stale bread. When she was first taken, yanked from the small, sun-drenched fishing village where she had laughed and played just days before, her mind had fought. She had screamed until her throat was raw, kicked until her ankles were bruised, and promised death to the men who held her. But the world of the Sultan's reach was vast, and her resistance was a tiny flicker of defiance against an ocean of steel and silk. By the time they arrived at the immense, imposing walls of the palace in Istanbul, her fight had bled out, leaving behind a hollow, trembling quiet. She was 14 years old, a girl named Eileen, and by the time she stepped through the gate of the Harem-iHümâyun, the Imperial Harem, that name was already beginning to feel like a memory belonging to someone else. The instant she crossed the threshold, the air changed. Outside, there was the noise of the city. Carts, vendors, calls to prayer. Inside, there was a deep, unnatural quiet. A silence so complete it felt manufactured, designed to absorb all sound and all hope. The halls were not dark. They were incredibly bright, lined with dazzling tiles and intricate, golden patterns that seemed to mock the sadness they contained. It was an overwhelming display of beauty, but a beauty that felt cold and judging, like a beautiful jewel wrapped around a deadly snake. This was the famous Ottoman Harem, the place people whispered about, calling it a paradise of pleasure. A towering woman with eyes like chips of granite, wearing layers of thick, dark fabric, approached her. This was the Calphus, one of the overseers. She didn't shout or even speak loudly. Her voice was low, cutting, and efficient, like a knife slipping between ribs. "Your name is gone," the woman stated, not as a threat, but as a simple, undeniable fact of the universe. "Your family, your village, your language. Forget the sound of the sea. Forget the smell of the fish. Forget the faces of the people who loved you. They are dust." Eileen tried to speak, to protest, to cling to the single word Eileen. But the Calphus did not wait. Two stern-faced servants took her arms, leading her down a maze of corridors. They stripped her of her coarse, peasant clothes and subjected her to a brutal washing ritual. They scrubbed her skin until it stung, not to make her clean, but to erase the remnants of her old life. They even cut her long, dark hair, the hair her mother had lovingly braided, into a severe, shorter style suitable for servitude. "You are nothing now," the Calphus said when they were done, holding up a polished silver mirror. Eileen stared at the girl reflected there. She looked different, paler, with wide, terrified eyes. She did not look like Eileen. "You are just clay. The harem will shape you. Your old self will bring you sorrow and, perhaps, death. You are here to serve the Sultan's house. You will learn the ways of the harem, and you will learn them fast." She was given a new name, a single, soft, Turkish name, Lail Tulip, a beautiful name, but one given without her consent, like a tag slapped onto a possession. Lail was placed in a large room with dozens of other girls, all of different ages and origins, all sharing the same vacant, shocked look in their eyes. They were the Karais, the slaves. Their paradise was a well-oiled machine of control, a stunningly decorated prison where the physical walls were less important than the psychological ones. The Calphus words echoed in Lail's mind, "Your name is gone." The true horror of the harem was not the chains. for there were none on the surface, but the constant, grinding effort to steal the person inside the body. Every girl here was in a frantic, secret race to hold onto a tiny piece of who they were, even as the harem demanded they become perfect, silent, and compliant tools for the empire. It was the first, chilling lesson Lael learned. The harem was not a pleasure palace. It was a factory for the destruction of identity. Lael's new life, the life of Lael the Tulip, was dictated by the rhythmic clang of a copper bell and the silent scrutiny of the Kalphas. The most crucial part of her day was the education. It was not the kind of learning she dreamed of, reading real books, discussing history, or seeing the world. This education was narrow, intense, and utterly manipulative. The classrooms were lavish, filled with cushions and scented smoke, designed to lull the girls into a false sense of security and importance. The teachers, specialized ustas, were elderly women who spoke with soft, patient voices, making the lessons feel almost comforting, which only made the content more insidious. The primary subject was sultanic praise. "Repeat after me, girls," commanded Ustasai, teacher, Halim, a woman whose smile never quite reached her eyes. "The Sultan is the shadow of God on earth. His wisdom is the sky. His power is the sea." Dozens of young voices, including Lael's, echoed the phrases. "The Sultan is the shadow of God on earth. His wisdom is the sky. His power is the sea." They spent hours every morning memorizing endless poems, sayings, and historical accounts, all tailored to one single purpose: to elevate the Sultan and the House of Osman to the level of divinity. They learned that the Sultan was not merely a ruler, but the center of the universe, the source of all grace, beauty, and justice. Lael, whose mind was sharp and quick, absorbed the facts easily, but her heart rebelled. She remembered her father, a simple man, saying a prayer before he went to sea, thanking God for the fish. The idea that a single man, no matter how powerful, could stand in for God felt wrong. A grotesque lie whispered in gold-plated rooms. But here, rebellion was silent. To question was to invite suspicion. To disagree was to invite punishment. The punishment was never loud or theatrical. It was subtle, designed to isolate and terrify. A girl who spoke out of turn might find her food portion shrinking, or be assigned the most grueling, solitary chores, often in the terrifying, dark cellars of the palace, reminding her that she was disposable. The education also included language, music, and embroidery. But even these cultural arts were twisted. Learning Persian was not about reading poetry, but about flawlessly executing the proper phrases of submission if one were ever to enter the Sultan's presence. Learning to play the oud was not about expressing emotion, but about providing a gentle, perfect background score to the lives of the royal family. The goal was not to make them cultured women. The goal was to make them automated subjects. They were taught to move with precision, to speak with reverence, and to act without hesitation, always anticipating the needs of the court. Their individuality was slowly ground down under the weight of perfect manners and mandated praise. One evening, Lael made a friend, or at least found a fellow traveler in this silent purgatory. Her name was Zara, a girl a year or two older from a distant Balkan province. Zara had a quiet, thoughtful intensity that mirrored Lael's own. They were scrubbing the marble floors of a long corridor together, their knees aching and their backs stiff. Lael felt the need to speak, a desperate urge to acknowledge the shared absurdity of their situation. "Do you think he is truly the shadow of God?" Lael whispered, her voice barely audible above the wet sound of the rags. Zara froze. Her eyes darted quickly, nervously, toward the end of the hall where a Kalphas stood, apparently dozing. She didn't speak. Instead, Zara slowly, deliberately, lowered her head until her chin touched her chest. She then raised her hands, palms up, in a gesture that Lael recognized from their lessons. Total unquestioning acceptance. Lael watched, horrified. Zara was not acting. The fear in her eyes was real, and the gesture was a warning. Do not speak. The walls hear us. This was the first time Lael truly encountered the language of silence, the bizarre and crucial system of communication used within the harem walls. Spoken words, especially words that expressed personal opinion, complaint, or dissent, were deadly risks. The air itself was thick with spies, both Kalphas and the girls themselves, desperate to gain favor by reporting a whisper of defiance. Therefore, the women had developed a sophisticated secret system. A quick, downward glance. Danger. Stop what you are doing. Touching the throat and then pointing at the door. Someone listens / someone is coming. A hand placed flat over the heart, followed by a slight head shake. I am afraid. A hand brushing the cheek, followed by a hidden finger curl. Hold on to your anger / sadness. Zara, without saying a word, had just used a clear series of glances and a tightening of her lips to tell Lael, I know what you mean, but never, ever say it out loud. Lael swallowed the lump in her throat. She realized the education here was dual-layered. The loud, official lesson of obedience and praise, and the quiet, unofficial lesson of absolute, terrified silence. The harem was teaching them not just what to think, but how to not think and how to not speak. If they couldn't speak, they couldn't bond. If they couldn't bond, they couldn't rebel. Lael returned to scrubbing the marble, the golden patterns on the wall seeming to shimmer with the silent, poisonous knowledge she had just gained. She was no longer Eileen. She was Lael, and Lael was learning to be silent. The sofa room was where the girls gathered for official leisure, a few hours each afternoon designed to observe their grace and temperament. It was a spacious hall, opulent and warm, but the heavy embroidered cushions and velvet drapes only seemed to muffle the tension, not the sound of watchful eyes. Everyone was pretending to be relaxed, and everyone knew it was a lie. Lael was assigned a spot near Zara to mend a piece of silk embroidery. Their fingers worked swiftly with the needles, following the intricate patterns, but their minds were consumed by the dangerous dance of glances. Today, the terror was focused on Fatim. Fatim was a new arrival, barely 13, and still wept easily. She had been caught speaking a sentence in her native language the night before, a simple phrase about missing her mother. The punishment was not physical. It was an hour alone with the Mazika, the Kalphas who specialized in emotional manipulation and silence enforcement. The relentless, cold psychological dressing down left Fatim shaking for hours. Lael glanced sideways, a slight, almost imperceptible tilt of her head towards Fatim. This tiny movement was a question in the language of silence. Is she still okay? Zara's needle paused for a fraction of a second. Then her eyes shifted briefly not to Fatim, but to the Kalphas sitting at the far end of the room, pretending to read. The Kalphas was always watching. Zara then gave Lael a sharp, almost painful intake of breath, making her chest expand slightly before letting it out slowly. This was a complex message. The danger is still high. Be careful. Do not approach her. Lael understood. Speaking to Fatim, even a gentle comfort, would be seen as an act of defiance, a small shared rebellion that the harem could not tolerate. Unity among the Karais, slave girls, was the one thing that could threaten the system. The beautiful, silent halls were designed to isolate them, turning every girl into a solitary unit of fear. The silent communication continued as they worked. Lael accidentally pulled a thread too tightly while securing a knot, causing the delicate silk to pucker slightly. A tiny, insignificant mistake. But in the harem, small mistakes often became huge opportunities for punishment or, worse, for others to gain favor by reporting them. Her mind screamed, "I have ruined it. They will see." Before she could panic, Zara's hand, moving to pick up a new spool of thread, subtly shifted. Her middle finger, the one closest to Lael, tapped the cushion exactly 3 times. Tap, tap, tap. Lael recognized the pattern. It meant, breathe, fix it slowly, do not react. Lael felt a rush of cold relief. She took a deep breath, and with slow, steady movements, she used the point of her needle to ease the tension in the stitch, fixing the mistake without drawing attention. This was the terrifying reality. Their lives depended on reading these micro-expressions, these minute body shifts. They lived in a constant state of hyper-awareness, where every glance, every movement of a hand, and every soundless breath carried more weight than any shouted argument outside these walls. The effort of this constant, silent translation was exhausting, a mental burden that never lifted. The greatest toll, Lael realized, was on her internal world. Because she could not trust herself to be silent, she began to fear her own thoughts. If a thought of her mother, or her village, or the unfairness of her captivity surfaced, Lael would immediately try to crush it. Don't think that. Don't let it show on your face. Even if no one is looking, the thought itself is a danger. She began to check her own expression in the polished brass reflection of a hanging lamp. Was her mouth too tight? Did her eyes hold too much sadness? She was becoming her own Kalphis, constantly monitoring and correcting her inner self. One day, while cleaning the inner courtyard, Lael saw a small, bright red tulip pushing up through the cracked stone paving. It was a single, defiant burst of color and life in a controlled gray space. A small, wild thought of freedom bloomed in her mind. Immediately, the learned self-censor slammed down. She looked around quickly, even though no one was near. She then looked down at the tulip, and instead of allowing the memory of her name, Lael Tulip, to spark hope, she repeated the harem's lesson in her mind. I am nothing. I serve. She even briefly considered pulling the flower out, crushing the small sign of life, just to prove her submission to herself. She didn't, but the mere thought, the willingness to destroy something beautiful and defiant, showed her how deep the control was sinking. The harem was successfully moving beyond controlling her body. It was starting to control her soul. The language of silence had not only stopped external communication, it had begun to mute her internal voice, replacing it with the sound of the Kalphis cold, judging stare. She was learning to erase Eileen not just for the palace, but for survival inside her own head. The unspoken word was the heaviest weight of all. The harem was not just a cage. It was a complex social ladder, a treacherous pyramid. Every girl, from the newest arrival like Lael to the most seasoned servant, knew that their entire future depended on moving up this invisible ladder. This was the brilliant, twisted design that completed the psychological torture. They were forced to compete with each other for their own bondage. The Kalphis began to introduce small, deliberate differences in treatment, the poison of privilege. One morning, after a week of perfect silence during her embroidery lessons, Lael was singled out. Lael, come forward, commanded Hanem, Lady Melek, a Kalphis whose face was usually set in a stone mask of indifference. Lael's heart hammered. She walked forward, keeping her eyes low, careful not to betray any fear or hope. Hanem Melek did not scold her. Instead, she offered a thin, small pastry, dusted with rosewater and sugar. You have been attentive. Your hands are steady. Your silence is excellent. This is your reward. Lael took the pastry. It was the most delicious thing she had tasted since arriving. The taste was rich, sweet, and intoxicating. But what was truly intoxicating was the feeling that came with it. Approval. When she returned to her spot, she felt the stares of the other girls. They were subtle, angry glances. Lael caught Zara's eye. Zara gave her the briefest, sharpest downwards glance. Danger. But this time, Lael's feeling was different. Mixed with the fear was a tiny, cold flicker of satisfaction. I am better than them. I was chosen. I pleased the Kalphas. This was the start of the institutionalized Stockholm Syndrome. Lael was beginning to internalize the values of her captors. The harem taught that the only way to survive, to gain small comforts, or even to avoid terrible punishment, was to earn the approval of the system. This approval came not from strength or virtue, but from being perfectly compliant, perfectly silent, and perfectly useful. The rewards were small, yet desperately meaningful. A warmer cloak in the winter and an extra hour of sleep. A slight improvement in duties, moving from scrubbing floors to polishing silver. The biggest reward, being allowed to stand closer to the Valide Sultan, Sultan's mother, or a high-ranking woman, offering the remote, incredible possibility of being noticed by the Sultan himself. The harem masters knew that true rebellion comes from shared misery. By giving one girl a piece of sweet cake, they instantly created jealousy and division among 30 others. The girls stopped watching the Kalphas with complete attention. They started watching each other. They became rivals in servitude. Lael saw this division immediately. The girls who were frequently overlooked, the clumsy, the slow, the ones who struggled to keep the silence, were treated with silent contempt by those who were excelling. Even Zara, her one point of connection, began to seem like a competitor. One afternoon, a large, beautiful ceramic vase was accidentally knocked over by a frightened girl named Asu. It shattered into dozens of pieces. The Kalphas was furious. Before the Kalphas could even speak, another girl, Selma, immediately pointed a shaking finger at Asu and then tapped her own chest with a gesture that said, "She is clumsy and unfit." Selma had thrown Asu under the carriage to save herself. This act was not condemned. In fact, the Kalphas gave Selma a thin, knowing smile. Asu was dragged away for punishment, and Selma, standing slightly taller, was praised for her loyalty to the order of the harem. Lael watched this with a knot of horror in her stomach, but even more horrifying was her own internal reaction. Asu was gone, but Lael felt a small, secret relief. It wasn't me, and now there is one fewer rival. The sweet pastry, the small compliment, these tiny moments had begun to shift her worldview. She was learning to value her own safety and small, earned privileges over the well-being of the other girls, who were, after all, just competitors for the one true prize, the possibility of status and survival. Lael started to work harder than ever, not out of fear of punishment, but out of a fierce desire for approval. She began to mimic the Kalphas' efficient movements, practicing her bowing until her back ached. She even began to correct the mistakes of others in her mind, the way a Kalphas would. She realized that if she could become a perfect, flawless part of the harem machine, the machine might finally stop hurting her. She craved that moment of acknowledgement, that small, sweet taste of superiority, because it was the only thing that made her feel human and safe in this inhuman place. The harem had taken her life, and now, Lael was desperately trying to earn it back, piece by agonizing piece, by becoming exactly what they wanted her to be. Lael's compliance did not go unnoticed. The small rewards became slightly bigger, and her duties became more specialized. She was moved from cleaning the main halls to assisting the head treasurer's personal scribe, a high-status position because it dealt with the financial secrets of the palace. This meant fewer hours on her knees scrubbing stone and more time in quiet rooms, organizing papers and preparing ink. This promotion was a huge victory in the harem's hierarchy. It meant Lael was close to power. She was trusted, obedient, and silent. She was becoming a Gozda, not yet a favorite of the Sultan, but a favorite of the system itself. But every rise in status came with a chilling moral cost. Her new position meant she had to cut ties with the lower-ranking girls. The Calphus made sure of this. "You are now a part of the palace's backbone, Lael," Hanem-Melek told her, her voice holding a rare hint of pride. "You will not waste time socializing with those who lack the discipline to rise. Do you understand?" "Yes, Hanem," Lael replied immediately, her voice flat and perfectly respectful. The order was simple but painful. It meant she had to abandon Zara. Zara was still in the main servant quarters, cleaning and embroidering. When Lael saw her in the courtyard, their eyes met. Zara gave a small, quick signal with her hand, one Lael had not seen before, but instinctively understood. "I miss you. Tell me what is happening." Lael felt a sharp pang in her chest, a pull back to the shared misery, the silent understanding that had been their lifeline. For a moment, she wanted to rush to Zara, to share her small victory, to apologize for the widening gap between them. But then, Lael remembered the sweet pastry, the warm cloak, and the terrified look on Asu's face when Selma betrayed her. She remembered the sheer, exhausting effort it took to be silent and perfect. If she talked to Zara now, if she showed weakness or attachment, the Calphus would know. All her hard-won status, her safety, would vanish. She would fall back down into the grinding misery of the lowest level, and maybe even worse. So Lael did the hardest thing she had done since entering the harem. She ignored Zara. She fixed her gaze on the opposite wall, her posture rigidly correct, and walked past her friend as if she were a piece of furniture. She felt the immediate shift in Zara's expression, the flicker of hurt, confusion, and then a profound, deep sadness. That night, Lael lay awake, feeling a new kind of coldness. It wasn't the cold of the marble floor, but the cold of isolation. She had secured her place in the palace, but she had destroyed the last piece of Eileen, the part that valued friendship, loyalty, and empathy. The psychological control was now complete. The harem had successfully taught Lael that self-preservation was the only virtue. Her identity as a slave girl was now fully integrated. Her survival depended entirely on the approval of her masters and the rejection of her peers. She had become an agent of the harem's division. Lael was given a new task that underscored her position, training the newest batch of arrivals. She was to teach them the basic phrases of praise and, more importantly, the strict rules of the language of silence. As she stood before a group of girls, their faces pale and eyes wide with the same fear she had once felt, Lael felt nothing but detachment. She spoke the rules in a cold, measured voice, echoing the Calphus. When one girl, barely a child, started to weep quietly, Lael did not offer comfort. Instead, she performed the exact silent gesture of the Calphus, a slow, deliberate shake of the head and a sharp, disappointed look, forcing the child to quiet herself. She was no longer Lael the tulip, the innocent captive. She was Lael, the perfected product of the harem. She had achieved status, but the price was her soul. She had survived by becoming a smaller, quieter version of her captor. The golden cage had not broken her body, but it had successfully hollowed out the person inside. She was safe, but she was profoundly, terribly alone. Life inside the palace was usually a predictable rhythm of silent work and rigid schedules. However, once every few months, the entire harem was seized by a nervous, trembling excitement, the possibility of the Sultan's presence. The Sultan, the Padishah, the shadow of God on earth, lived in a world separate from the thousands of women and servants in his own palace. His visits to the harem were rare, random, and terrifyingly significant. For the women, this was the moment their entire lives had been preparation for. To be noticed by the Sultan meant escaping the servitude of the Karais and becoming a Hasiki favorite or even, impossibly, the mother of a future sultan. This was the ultimate prize, the only true freedom, freedom through elevated bondage. On the day the word spread, a single, sharp-eyed eunuch whispered the news to the Valide Sultan's chief guard. The harem transformed. Layl was no longer merely organizing papers. She was now part of the preparatory detail, a high-status group tasked with ensuring the perfection of the Sultan's private apartments. This was her ultimate test. The air was thick with the scent of rose and jasmine, mixed with the sharp, nervous smell of sweat. The women moved with impossible precision, dusting surfaces already spotless, arranging jewels that already shone, and laying down fabrics that had never been touched. Every movement was a prayer for favor. Layl excelled. Her training in silence and efficiency made her movements fluid and perfect. She walked through the chaos of panic, observing the other girls scrambling, some of them subtly trying to sabotage one another. A misplaced slipper, a smear of water on the floor, small acts of desperate rivalry. Layl saw a girl named Nekla accidentally drop a large, heavy tapestry border. It landed with a soft thump, but the sound seemed to echo like thunder in the charged atmosphere. Nekla froze, her face draining of all color, knowing she had drawn a target on her back. In her past life, the old Eileen would have rushed to help. The old Layl might have glanced at Zara for silent guidance. But the perfected Layl acted differently. She did not rush to help, nor did she betray Nekla. Instead, she performed a masterful act of deflection. Layl, standing near a stack of linens, deliberately nudged the stack with her elbow. The linens shifted slightly, causing a quiet, distracting ripple of movement and noise. The Kalphas, whose attention had been momentarily fixed on Nekla, immediately snapped their gaze to Layl, expecting a mistake. Layl immediately dropped into a perfect, deep bow, her face showing nothing but humble apology for the minor linen disturbance. The Kalphas, seeing the quick, perfect submission and the minor nature of the linen shift, dismissed her with a sharp, almost approving wave of the hand. The moment of attention was broken, and by the time the Kalphas looked back, Nekla was already silently, quickly, rolling the tapestry back up. Layl had used her perfected obedience not to help a friend, but to efficiently manage a crisis that threatened the order of the harem. She had saved Nekla not out of kindness, but out of a deep-seated, instinctual need to maintain the perfection of the system she now served. She was rewarded with a private nod from Hanem Melek. "Well done, Layl. You handled the situation." Later that evening, after the Sultan's brief, quiet inspection was over and he had retreated to his own private chambers without choosing any of the girls. The harem settled back into the aftermath. The great excitement had passed, leaving behind a residue of crushed hopes and exhaustion. Layl stood alone in the hallway, arranging a vase of tulips, her namesake flower. Nekla approached her cautiously. Nekla did not speak. She simply bowed her head, looked at Layl with genuine, grateful eyes, and then placed a small, polished seashell in Layl's hand. It was a token of deep thanks, a piece of the outside world, given with reverence. Layl looked at the shell, then at Nekla. She should feel warmth, a sense of restored humanity. But all she felt was the cold, hard weight of the Kalphas' silent teachings. Layl slowly, deliberately, opened her hand and placed the seashell on a nearby marble ledge. She gave Nekla a sharp, silent, disapproving look, the look of a Kalphas. Then, without a word, she walked away. The shell was a risk. It was a connection to the outside world. It was a token of attachment. Layl knew with absolute certainty that if Hanem Melek found the shell, she would see it as a sign of weakness, of disobedience, of a heart that was not yet fully dedicated to the palace. By rejecting the gift, Layl rejected the last chance for genuine human connection. The psychological torture was complete. She had reached the ultimate stage. She was no longer merely obeying her captor's rules. She was enforcing them on herself and others because she genuinely believed the rules were necessary for her survival and status. The captive had fully internalized the captor's world. The golden cage was locked from the inside. Years passed in the glittering, silent halls of the harem. Lael, the girl who was once Eileen, had long since vanished. The Lael that remained was a perfect, efficient, and profoundly cold woman. She rose steadily through the ranks, not through beauty or luck, but through perfect obedience and unwavering competence. She became a Hazaneter USTA Chief Treasurer's assistant, a position of immense responsibility and trust. She managed the accounts, oversaw the jewels, and controlled the flow of materials for the royal household. This status meant she had her own small, exquisitely decorated suite of rooms, fine clothing, and servants who were now entirely beneath her. She was safe, successful, and had achieved the highest possible status within the walls without becoming a concubine. Her success was the ultimate proof that the harem's psychological methods worked. She craved the approval of the Valide Sultan and the chief eunuch more than she craved air. The harem was no longer a cage. It was her world, and the hierarchy was her only comfort. One cold winter afternoon, Lael was overseeing the inventory of the royal furs. The room was warm, draped in expensive velvet, and filled with the scent of cedar. Her small staff of servants moved quietly, afraid to meet her eye. She was feared because she was perfectly just, meaning she reported every tiny infraction, every misplaced item without mercy or emotion. A tiny, familiar movement in the corner caught her attention. A young, nervous servant girl, struggling with a heavy chest, gave the slightest, quickest glance of shared, silent panic. The gesture Lael had learned years ago from Zara. The girl was desperate for Lael to notice her struggle, to grant a moment of human recognition. Lael looked at the girl. She recognized the fear, the isolation, and the desperate plea for connection. She knew exactly what it felt like to be that girl. The memory of her own early terror, of Zara's helpful signal, and the weight of the unwanted seashell flashed through her mind. But the response was automatic, conditioned, and immediate. Lael did not give the girl a warm gesture, a nod of understanding, or even a cold reprimand. She simply gave her a blank stare of complete indifference. Lael's expression conveyed a powerful, silent message. You are not my concern. Your struggle is your own. I do not see you. The young girl lowered her eyes instantly, her expression crushed, and struggled on in silence. Lael felt nothing, no guilt, no pity, just the quiet satisfaction that the order was maintained and the work was continuing efficiently. She had achieved the ultimate psychological state of the captive. She was free within her chains because she no longer saw the chains. She saw only the system. In her luxurious, isolated rooms, Lael never spoke of her past. She never allowed a moment of vulnerability. She ate alone, enjoyed her fine clothes alone, and slept alone. She had all the privileges, all the wealth, and all the security that the harem could offer a woman who was not of the sultan's family. But on the rare nights when the palace was completely silent, Lael sometimes stood by her window, looking out over the immense, sleeping city. The city was noisy, chaotic, and full of life. The life of Eileen, the life she had traded away for this gilded cage. She would try to remember the sound of the sea or the laughter of her mother, but the memories were dull, muted, and distant. The harem's education, the language of silence, and the pursuit of approval had not only suppressed her identity, they had replaced it with an emptiness. Lael had won the game. She had survived by becoming the perfect slave. But in her supreme success, she found the final, chilling truth of the harem. The absolute silence of her success was the sound of her soul's death. She was safe, she was respected, but she was entirely, utterly alone. A jewel of immense value, sparkling beautifully in a place where no one truly lived. The story of Layl, the tulip, was the story of what they did to women inside the Ottoman harem. They gave them beautiful chains and taught them to love the golden cage.